Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Madness Entertainment Group presents the Madness Comic Network with original programming and additional comic-related content.
Hey, we want to shout out to our sponsors, Daytona Beach Comic Con. If you are a fan of comic books, if you're a fan of comic book conventions, and if you like meeting comic book creators and getting comics and comic-related stuff, then you need to make your plans to attend Daytona Beach Comic Con. This year's show is September 9th and 10th. Silverline will be there, so you should make your plans to be there too. We'll see you there. If you like comics and find yourself in the Orlando, Florida area, doesn't everyone come to Orlando at some point in time to see the House of Mouse? But when you're here, you need to make it a point to visit Coliseum of Comics, especially the one on East Colonial Drive. They carry Silverline comics, even a limited edition Coliseum of Comics version of our comics. So, when you go, be sure to ask for Silverline Comics and tell them we sent you. OCD stands for Orlando Collector Deviants. OCD, Steve and Trish, they're a family of geeks who promote geek things, particularly those around the Orlando, Florida area. They're big supporters of Silverline, and we think you should be supporters of theirs too. Go give them some love. If you are an independent comic book maker and you need to get your independent comics made, you need to look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our books, and they do a bang-up job. They're not only trusted by Silverline, but many, many independent comic book makers. Head on over to kablam.com and see for yourself just how easy it is to have your comic printed by them. And tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kilber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday nights as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
And here we are, creating beyond calculation, beyond politics, beyond the big two. Welcome, Silverliners, to the wonderful world of Wednesday Wham. I'm your host, Dean Zachary, and we're joined by our core crew tonight. These are the mainstays that always show up. We have the Superior Skeptic, Aaron Humphreys. We have Barbara J. Kelberg, the Empress of the Inks, and Rob Davis, the Paragon of Pencils. And we've got a great show tonight because we're going to be exploring the influence of Japanese animation and Japanese comics called manga on the American comic book culture. And we're lucky tonight because one of our core members is very well versed in the anime world. And I'm speaking, of course, of Aaron Humphreys, who is our resident expert on anime. Thanks, Aaron, for being our Wikipedia tonight.
As much as I can.
Because
Aaronopedia.
Learning as we go. I'm going to start out by just setting the table here. Most of us who've been around as long as Barb and Rob and I have, were introduced to anime back with Akira, an animated film, I guess it was late 80s. And then shortly thereafter, there was Ghost in the Shell in the 90s. We became familiar with the fact that there were animated films made in Japan that reflected the printed Japanese comic books that were very highly detailed and dealt very much with science fiction themes, but other themes as well. But the ones that seemed to rise to the top early on in America were science fiction theme based. And then, of course, Studio Ghibli started producing lots of successful films here. And Masashi, I believe, is the one. Didn't Masashi do Ghost in the Shell? Or was that someone else?
No, his name is Matsumune Shiro. I'm not
Matsumune
sure.
Shiro. Okay.
It's the original manga creator. Now the director.
Right.
Let me look up the director. Now I'm kind of curious to director. So keep talking. So
yes, I'll keep talking. Ghost in the Shell, and then there were others that a lot of folks became familiar with. Appleseed is one, a popular one.
Yeah.
In the mid '90s, there was Evangelion. Neon Genesis was wildly popular and spawned a bunch of sequels. And then for horror fans, there was something called Blood, The Last Vampire. And for martial arts fans, there was something called Ninja Scroll. And those were sort of the tent pole titles that Americans sort of got interested in. And then they got more popular, and there were more and more, and there's so many out there now. And what we're going to talk about tonight is primarily what makes anime so appealing, first in general, and then to the readership here, and how has it influenced not just content in American comic books, but also style. So I want to start off with Barb, as I often do, because I think Barb has mentioned that one of her first jobs, in fact, one of her first jobs may have been on an anime or manga, a subject matter. Is that true, Barb? Tell us a little bit about that.
Actually, my very first job wasn't doing inking. I was hired to do gray washes over Ben Dunn's Tiger X.
Oh,
very much, a precursor to, the battle bots that you see in the. What's that movie? I know it's right on the tip of my tongue.
Robotech?
No, where they're fighting the
Pacific Rim.
Yes,
Kaiju?
I love that movie.
Yeah, Kaiju.
Yes, it's very much of a precursor to Pacific Rim, but it was a lot of fun. It was my first introduction to anime, and I was lucky enough to attend the world premiere of Akira at San Diego Comic-Con.
How awesome!
Just blew me away.
Yeah.
Absolutely blew me. I'd never seen, up until that time, I had never seen animation of that caliber, or that seriousness. I mean, they tackled, world-ending stuff and nuclear bomb type stuff, and it was just stunning. I loved it.
What stood out the most besides the sort of serious subject matter that they addressed? What was it for you that stood out visually?
The backgrounds were just amazing. I mean, they put so much thought into that. You could just literally feel drenched in the background.
Yeah.
You felt like it was all around you. They did a wonderful job of making it very atmospheric.
Atmospheric. I agree.
Atmospheric.
I agree. I was stunned by the detail of the backgrounds, the attention to creating a realistic background rather than a stylized background, and the contrast between almost hyper-realistic backgrounds with very caricatured leading characters. So it has that. That's a distinctive aspect, I would say,
of manga in general. Yeah, manga and anime. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. It's very iconic characters and very almost photorealistic backgrounds. So now that's kind of gone by the wayside. It goes from genre to genre. Shoujo, which is a girl, doesn't do super realistic backgrounds. Not that I know, but so it goes. But for generally, and they, again, manga, they got that from Disney. They were trying to mimic Walt Disney, the guy that
Yes.
one of the first
I'm
guys
glad
who
you.
wrote the manga.
That was my only point I was going to
Yeah.
make, and you stole it from me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what he was trying to do. And that was a gentleman who did Astro Boy, and he did a
Yes.
bunch of other stuff. And if you look at his stuff, you could definitely see the Walt Disney influence much more, like in the old Astro Boy. And then, but if you think about Walt Disney films, they're very cartoon characters and very realistic backgrounds.
Yes, even in even in the first big epic feature, Snow White, the attention to detail of the forests and even the birds are anatomically close to correct for the most part, even though they're active. But the backgrounds are these beautiful paintings, and then you have these the goofy dwarves and a very stylized Snow White,
that's
and a very
caricatured
witch, and so on. So you're right. I guess that set what that did was that set the tone. And then when did it start? Would you say it started like in late 80s to become really known in America, Aaron? Is that fair?
Actually, if anime was starting to bring over here, there was I think the first. No, I didn't see this one, but I'm gonna say the first one. I can show you the ones I grew up with, but the first one I think was called Something the Lion.
Okay.
And in fact, the Lion King is heavily based on that. What is that called? Very old anime series, and it was on very specific channels.
Okay.
What is the name of that? The one that really got me. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, that's
It's called Kimba, the White Lion.
Kimba,
yes,
yes,
that was one of the first ones.
I remember that.
One of the first ones, and I think that might have been in the late 70s. So it did it over.
It was, that's I remember that.
Star Blazers was one of the first ones I saw.
Tim Eldred. Tim Eldred was a American comic book artist who really jumped onto anime in the United States very early on. He did Captain Harlock.
Yes.
Robotech.
Yeah.
So
that was the one they were trying to bring up. Yeah, Robotech. Star Blazers done it was Robotech for me, and Star Blazers. Star Blazers is just a funny show because I didn't realize, and I don't know if Americans did. The original name of the show in Japan is, I think it's Starship Yamato, Spaceship Yamato. I think it's Starship Yamato. But what was so funny is if you've ever seen it, it's about they were being attacked by aliens, and so there's only one spaceship geared with this huge wave cannon that goes into space to defeat the aliens and save the Earth. That spaceship is a retrofitted Yamato, which was the actual flagship of the Japanese in World War II, which was sunk.
Right.
You have this cartoon coming to America saying like the Earth's in trouble, and it's only because of the resurrection of the flagship. You sunk America to go save Earth. And as a kid, you didn't realize it, but in looking back, I'm like, oh, that's a little bit of like almost a weak nudge. Yeah, to literally America. Nobody picked it up. They made a live action movie of that show a few years ago. I've seen clips of it. It looks crazy, but yeah, they retrofitted an old World War II ship and set it in the space to fight aliens. It was called Star Blazers here. And then from then
there was definitely a concerted push back in the late 80s, early 90s to try to copy the success of manga books. We never did get it fully off the ground like we should have, but they really tried for a while, and Ben Dunn and Tim Eldred were at the head of that.
It's funny because it's there was a lot of anime. There was not a lot of manga. I remember growing up. You could find it in America, but it was harder. There was more cartoons. Voltron again was one. Robotech was one. And of course, Robotech was 3 cartoons from Japan that were made and Americanized, rewritten into an American story. That's why Macross is a little different from. But they were trying to introduce anime, but it was weird because the Americans thought, well, the only way we can introduce anime is to rewrite it or redo it for an American audience. Star Blazers was the same way. I think it was also kind of rewritten
and Americanize the art.
America, yeah, a little bit. I think they even added in little. I think in Robotech, I think they added little spots of animation in to complete the story and stuff. But it was a little strange because it was like if they would have just left it alone, it probably would have done better. But they just didn't think Americans would take a Japanese show fully Japanese, so they changed it. They did the same thing with the Power Rangers. I watched there's a Netflix series called The Toys That Made Us, and they talk about
Yes,
Power
I've seen some
Rangers.
of that.
And
Yeah.
all the guy did, he's like, well, they do all these cool kung fu stunts on the Power Ranger show in Japan. If we could take all those clips and then just film a few little scenes of American teenagers running around school, and it just totally worked. So they filmed just the American clips, and then took all the kung fu action stuff from the Japanese shows and just put them together. And it's like, think how much money that must save. I mean, you're not filming any of the action, you're borrowing it. So yeah.
Well, one thing that changed in general, my colleagues' approach to how we saw anime was, we were fans, but it was considered this niche interest up until the big splash of Mamoru Oshii's Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
That turned a corner. It was one of those where it was like this splash, and the ripples were sent all through all my comic book artist friends and comic fan friends who were like, have you seen this yet? Have you seen this yet? You got to see it. You got to, go to the theater. You got to get it on DVD, which, I did. Still had like the original one I bought.
Yeah, the original one.
But, that one seemed to resonate and encapsulate many of the main focuses that the anime films, the Japanese, even manga, were addressing in those days, which was the concept of AI, the power of AI and how it interacts with humanity, how an AI that practically functions as a human being would be treated by humans, how they would be used functionally in society that way, and the philosophical pros and cons of those issues, amid this futuristic city. So you had so much sci-fi thrown at you at once. It was like, whoa, so it almost felt like Blade Runner times 10, and here Blade Runner had addressed these in a quieter, more singular way, 15 years before.
Right.
But boom, here we get it in our face, and it's like, whoa, this is much deeper, much I guess a bigger fireworks show, so to speak.
Yeah.
Did it affect you like that, Aaron?
Yeah,
as well?
it did. No, I had read Ghost in the Shell because I was a fan of Appleseed, and so I started reading Ghost in the Shell. I think it was brought over by Dark Horse as well too. Don't quote me, but I think Dark Horse, I think the company that helped Dark Horse was Sentua. There was another name, and there was a co-collaboration where they brought it over. So he made Ghost in the Ghost in the Shell comic is a little, it's serious but a little goofier. They had like these spider-like mechs because the guy Shiro liked spiders. I think he collected them and like owned spiders, and he just liked them. And so he made the spider mechs, and the spider mechs were talking. They were goofy in the comic. So the comic was a little bit of like tongue-in-cheek humor, and it was a little bit of action, and then there's a lot of philosophy. And he goes very much detail. The movie took out the humor, and I think kind of streamlined it. I think the movie streamlined it, but I did know about it when I saw Ghost in the Shell. I was excited, but by that time I had seen Akira and stuff, and so I was kind of in the know that this was coming. Like I knew Ghost in the Shell was coming.
Oh yeah.
They have made Appleseed, and it's weird because they did make an Appleseed OVA when I was a kid, and it's not very good. I mean, I was excited to see it. In the recent years, they have made 3 CGI movies of Appleseed. Some of them okay. I mean, he never finished his series, so some are okay, some are, But the fact that in Japan, Appleseed was huge. I mean, they had video games of it and all sorts of stuff. So when they made Ghost in the Shell in Japan, it was like, oh, it's the same guy made that, so it was an instant hit. I mean, the guy was a big deal in Japan before coming to America. But yeah, it's funny. There was a lady online who was talking about anime in the 80s and 2000 and in the early 90s when anime started picking up, especially with the VHS market where you could buy stuff. But a lot of them were like an hour long for like $30. I mean, they're super expensive. But most of the anime in the early 90s was very sort of dark, moody, bloody, and aggressive. It was really different. In fact, I remember when Sailor Moon came out here, and you're like, Sailor Moon, what the? So, but a lot of the anime today is almost a little kind of goofy. It's a little different, but it's funny.
Yeah.
And apparently you can watch a lot of these OVAs on YouTube. There was horror ones. There's one called like Tokyo something. It was like a 4-part series in Tokyo. I remember. I'm trying to think of some of the ones. Battle Angel Lita came out with the movie. That was an original, it was an hour-long cartoon that everyone liked. But there was blood and nudity, and no one had ever seen that. So imagine a bunch of kids in the 90s going like, dude, you got to watch these cartoons because they're so edgy. And
yeah, they're edgy. They're for
Right.
adults. And that was something that really pushed the envelope, even though, to be fair to Ralph Bakshi, he had already
did it
done
first. Yes, he
He
did.
did it first. And
We were just talking about that.
Yeah.
we knew.
Wizards and stuff.
We knew
Which is
that was doable. But in terms of just sheer volume, we were getting all this material from Japan, and it covered everything. And even like we'll address some of the issues here in Neon Genesis Evangelion. The young man who's the central figure, Shinji, is what, about 14 years old?
Yeah, that's a huge motive in Japan. Most of the anime I see deal with teenagers. That's one.
Right.
I mean, Naruto, they're all teenagers. Dragon Ball Z, they're young. I don't know if they're teenagers.
But why? Why is teenagers such a huge theme?
Yeah, to explain why that's a common thread.
I think it's now. I have some guesses on that. One, I think you're targeting if most of the anime that is very popular that we get in America that you see all the stuff is done by Shonen Jump. Shonen manga is geared towards young kids. Shoujo is I think that's geared towards young girls, but it might just be like kind of romantic love manga. So we're getting a lot of genre that are geared towards teenagers, and of course they put teenagers as the main protagonists because that's who's reading it.
Yeah.
So that's why you're seeing so much of it. I mean, I think a lot of times the Japanese like to talk about that sort of growing into the kind of person, responsibility, that sort of years of going from a teenager to a responsible citizen. But so many of them, very rarely do I see a lot of anime. Ghost in the Shell is almost an exception. I mean, even Akira, they were teenagers.
Yeah,
of course.
They've always done that. Yeah.
If you catch the teenagers at a impressionable age, they're going to stick with anime and manga for the rest of their lives.
Exactly, and I think that's what they were going for.
That worked because it worked for me, like in terms of the classic Star Wars, right, which has elements of Japanese influence without a doubt.
Oh yeah, mostly from the movies more than anime.
Right.
Seven Samurai and stuff.
I saw it at the right age,
and
I was
18.
I was hooked, for life. And so
Luke
they're
was
really smart to do that, to start with some care. But what's nice about at least for the ones I've seen, the more well-known anime films, they appeal to a broader audience. When you get into Miyazaki's Studio Ghibli films, they seem to transcend niche markets and go for the broader audiences, because Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle, My Neighbor Totoro, sure, you could say, well, it's for kids, but they also touch on themes for a broader audience.
Especially Princess Mononoke, that touches, he touches a lot on environmental issues, some political, mostly environmental. And I consider him just kind of like the original Walt Disney of Japan. Like, Walt Disney in America, and he took the same idea and just took this animation studio. And he's been around, one of the last. In fact, they put out a CG animated Ghibli movie, and it didn't do well because they're so well known for their traditional that it was just kind of like, it's not going to work.
That's something to touch on here too. I want you to expand on this if you could. Why do you think, or do you think that the two-dimensional animation aspect is part and parcel of what's appealing? Because here we are in America, it's like, oh, that's old school now. We're going to 3D. Look over here, kids. Look at all this stuff here. We can do 3D. Look at all this. Everything looks, like it's made out of Nerf balls. Look, and it bounces and it's fun. And forget about all that 2D stuff. And yet, anime is not doing that.
Not all. They do have 3D elements, but most of the characters are not. Like, they'll do the mechs and robots in 3D, which I can understand. I mean, even drawing those. I mean, those mechs are complicated. If you want them more complicated, it's easier to do a 3D model. But they're still the main characters are usually 2D. Some 3D elements here and there, but usually not. And I think the Japanese over the years have been trying to figure out a way to seamlessly show a 3D model and make it look 2D, and you can't tell the difference. There's some stuff that actually does pretty well. There was a video game called Guilty Gear, made by a company called Arc Systems, a fighting game. And they started out very traditional 2D, and of course used up a lot of memory. They have gone full 3D, but their character models look almost 2D. Like they've got it. Now, one of the reasons they may be able to pull that off is the camera's not rotating around them. Like in a 3D movie, it's looking at one straight. So, but they're actually able to pull it off. I'm like, I know it's 3D, but you're mimicking 2D pretty well. So they're getting there. It just, I mean, literally just comes down the cost. This is why so much 2D animation is like Nickelodeon and all those people will just do the animation in Korea. A lot of it's Korea, some in Vietnam, Japan. Because it's cheaper. This is why most of the Japanese actually ended up making anime instead of live action movies. It was cheaper to make animation in Japan than live action movies. Just I would assume for retail, places to shoot film. I mean, they were on an island. And America was opposite. It was easier to shoot film, and it's more expensive to animate. So it's literally just a reverse for whatever reason.
Reverse marketplace. Is it fair to say that it's going to remain 2D cell shaded of 3D frames in terms of, because the market loves the 2D look, or do you see it eventually going to full 3D as the market grows?
It might, but I don't see that. It's going to be cell shaded. There's
I agree.
a particular look and stuff to animate that 3D's just not there. It's getting there. I mean, I even watch 3D animated American movies and still have this weird uncanny valley.
I do too.
Where I'm like,
it's the uncanny valley situation.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I want to touch on this. Do you, as an anime fan, and you've read so much of it and seen so much, read so much manga and seen so much anime, how did you feel about Final Fantasy? Remember that film that came out years ago?
Yeah, I actually saw that in the theater. That was,
I did too.
They were trying to do live, and of course, make it. I mean, there was a big push in Hollywood to do. Even Robert Zemeckis did this with Beowulf, that Beowulf movie.
Yes.
Can't remember. And there was another movie he tried. The idea was, well, think of how cheaper it would be if we can just replace real actors. And the Japanese were in on this too with the Final Fantasy. The movie didn't do as well with the Final Fantasy fans because it was such departure from the source material. Now, granted, every Final Fantasy video game is its own thing. I mean, you can play any of them in any order, and they're all their own story. They don't really connect. But it was like this complete sci-fi thing and no fantasy elements. So it didn't really work. I actually liked the film. I think they just should have dropped the Final Fantasy moniker and called it something else. But that was their big push with Zemeckis to try to, okay, we're going to have super realistic movies. It's CGI, but it's going to look like movies. But they still can't do the uncanny valley.
They can't quite bridge that.
Not there yet.
I think saving those 3D realistic scenes for boutique moments, select moments in films is probably a smarter way to go. Now, we're perfectly segueing into the next part of the discussion. I want to really get your take on when American producers try to replicate or do a live action version of anime. Does it work? When does it work? When doesn't it work? And let's start with one of the most well-known. Let's start with Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
It was obviously made into a live action film a few years back.
That was Spielberg,
How did you feel about it? And, did it work for you? Did it not? What parts did, what parts didn't? Expand for us, please.
Overall, I liked it. Again, you're going to, this is, and just on a broader note, why it's so hard to translate manga or anime into live action is manga and anime have a very specific sequential storytelling technique. Speed lines, certain ways they do the shots or whatever. This is unique to the manga. The anime can replicate that replicate that easier with the visuals. They can do the
Yes.
speed lines. They can do that. Once you go into live action, there's a lot of those elements that make manga, that sequential storytelling language, is lost. And it's the same thing with American comics too. I mean, it's like when you put Superman, and it's like, I imagine Superman, but was it really Henry Cavill? You know, it's like, so there's always that. I think it's a little bit more of a departure for manga, because we usually draw American superheroes somewhat realistically. Manga does not. So if you see somebody who's like, there's a real person between an anime fan, you're like, well, I guess I kind of see it. Ghost in the Shell worked, and Akira might work, but Ghost in the Shell worked because it was one of the few animes that started stretching towards the realistic. What the comic was more cartoony. The original animated movie, the way they did the characters is going a little more towards realism, so it wasn't a far jump to the movie. But that was only one of the few. Akira could do that too. They tried a Dragon Ball Z.
Doesn't work. Yeah,
because I can't remember the artist who I'm forgive me, anime fans, I'm forgetting the artist's name who does Dragon Ball Z. He's so stylized. Once you take his style out of the show, it just crumbles. It can't maintain it. It looks like a bad cosplay film instead of the anime.
Yeah.
So it just does, and that's kind of
Akira Toriyama.
Yeah, Toriyama.
Okay.
And I love his art. I think his stuff is fantastic. But again, that's why it doesn't really work. Battle Angel Alita did a little bit. The guy who drew that is very anime, but he gave her the big eyes, kind of like anime. So he tried the.
Yeah, what is up with that?
It was a convention. I mean, she's a robot, so I guess you could take it when she's a robot.
Yeah, but what is it with the big eyes in anime and manga?
Disney. It's Walt Disney. It's all Walt Disney. They were trying to mimic the big eye. If you look at old Walt Disney, look at Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, they all have big eyes and small mouths. It was all
and
Walt
it's
Disney.
Also for the practical reason of it's easier to emote with the eyes and with big hands. You know, like Mickey Mouse has the big gloved hands, big eyes. It's easier to get emotions over exaggerated that way.
Exactly.
You know, because I could imagine, you know, when the Disney animators were doing Snow White, you know, how are we going to show emotion with this realistically drawn character of Snow White with her small hands and her regular realistic face?
Yeah.
And they did it with sort of the old-fashioned theatrical blocking of acting, you know, over-exaggerating movements. And
exactly.
That sort of thing.
And most people generally, when they look at, even when you talk with somebody else, you look them in the eye. You don't look at their mouth or body language. You look them in the eye. So most human expression is through the eye. I mean, this is like, I mean, people like, how do you make a good focal point in any anime or picture or whatever, especially any picture? You just give them eyes. They're going to look at the eyes first. That's just human nature. We look at eyes. So yeah, they're going to be the biggest and the biggest communicator. Yeah, that was all Walt Disney going into that. And then they just took it and ran with it. And there's some anime where the eyes are smaller, like Akira, or they're like huge, like I think some get so big that that's like all eyes and little mouth, and that's a little overboard.
There's like there's like a dozen different very distinct styles of manga, and it's called this method or that method or this style or that style. But the ones with the super huge eyes and they'll look, you know, like regular comic, and then all of a sudden when they have something really like surprise or something, then they get real caricaturized where they, you know, their mouth is just like totally unrealistic. It's open.
There could be a cultural, now I am guessing at this, and this is not said to offend anyone, but I do know in Korea and Japan, there is a lot of people get a lot of plastic surgery to widen their eyes. And so I think there's a way, I feel maybe they feel there's a stigma having their eyes. And of course, the eyes develop, the reason Japanese and Asian eyes are that way is to actually protect them from snow blindness.
Yeah, I mean, and I think they're beautiful.
Yeah, I think they're beautiful. But again, it's a lot of them, and I think a lot of them want to look like the anime characters and stuff. And so I've just been ones where they make bigger. They also do the same thing with shaving the jawbone. They thin their jawbones and some. A lot of the ladies do.
Interesting.
Plastic surgery in Japan is huge, especially in Korea. I mean, it's huge business over there, and they do that a lot. And so I don't know if it's the big eye anime or something, but I mean, you know,
they're so beautiful to begin with. Why mess with perfection?
Well, you know, it's you know what it is. A lot of it may be that you always want what you don't have, right?
Exactly. So I think it's
grass is greener.
You want straight. If you're short, you want to be taller. If you're too tall, you want to be a little bit shorter.
That's just, I think, what it is.
Yeah,
I don't know
If
if it
you're
has
white bread like me, you want to be exotically beautiful like them.
Oh yeah, I mean, how many ladies who have curly hair want straight hair, and the ones who have straight hair want curly hair? I mean, this is like constant.
Yeah, it's a constant. So that's part of it. The other is there is because the Hollywood system was so impactful in the 20th century and influenced everybody, you know, Asia and Europe.
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of mimicry of, because a lot of their of the look of Caucasians, but also our Western style was also, you know, look at Cowboy Bebop and that sort of thing.
There was a lot of their characters did not look Japanese. Even Major Kusanagi, which is the main character in the show, and in fact, when somebody brought them over and showed and said that Scarlett Johansson's playing Ghost in the show, and a lot of the Japanese who were asked that question, is that bothered you? Like, they're like, well, no, she's an animated character. That's, I mean, whatever. They didn't care. But it's weird. There are some animes that do it. But yeah, a lot of, and I think their characters are just not even supposed to be any ethnicity. I think they're just kind of humans. They have like, you know, green hair and blue hair, and they're just kind of
a generic human.
Yes,
exactly.
That's you know, I'm going to inject this here too, and Aaron, you probably know this as well. Much of the art and poetry and fine art in Asian culture deals with the archetypical, rather than the individual. So to them, you know, it's not so much about a particular person. It's, if they're illustrating a samurai, it's a typical samurai, a typical merchant, a typical
an icon, more or less.
You know, that's more, not to say that they don't go on individual design and develop that, but very much of the traditional approach, especially in their poetry and the more traditional art, it was more about the typical archetype based on the cast of what they did.
Yeah.
Whether you were noble or not, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And I mean, I think what was it? I think in Japan, the 3 areas to become a politician, or like it was like they studied what as like poetry, philosophy, I think art might have been one.
Martial art.
Yeah, martial art. But I know poetry was one, and so a lot of that stuff went into those.
Poetry, archery, and Bushido. The Bushido code, which would be Kendo, the sword.
Kendo, yeah.
Kendo, yeah.
And so, yeah, a lot of that just, you know, but I think they do deal more in archetypes, even in the earliest Japanese drawings, like the classical, the wave. I mean, they are stylizing reality even then. Western art has always been trying more to mimic realism. I mean, even go to like the Renaissance, a lot of that art is to mimic realism as much as they could. I mean, okay, we granted Michelangelo painted women's head on men's bodies. We get that, you know, but I mean, they were trying. The Japanese didn't care. And it's not the only. I think a lot of Indian cultures also didn't. They were more like, no, we want the archetype, the characterization of that. And so a lot of the most famous Japanese old art that I've seen is much more stylized and realistic. And I think that probably just carries straight over in the anime.
Yeah,
looking at the archetypes or whatever. American and Western culture,
huge look and a huge integral part. You know, the cultural history is a huge integral part of where it comes now. So when we come back to the subject of adaptation in the Western traditions, how did it do? Did it do all right in terms of Ghost in the Shell? Was it well received in your opinion?
No, it bombed. We all know the reason. Anybody working here, we all know the general reason why that bombed, and it had to do with social politics. We'll just say that. But I think it was a little too much of a niche film. Ghost in the Shell still niche. I mean, even Ghost in the Shell, I think for the general American audience, they're more in the Star Wars and say something like Ghost in the Shell. Blade Runner is still considered a niche film.
Yeah, of
to
course.
the general public, it is more considered a niche film, even though it is very popular among sci-fi fans. It's considered a classic. Most people have not, who generally just watch movies, have not seen Blade Runner, and that would be on par with Ghost in the Shell. So yeah,
okay, that's a good comparison. Now let's talk about genre for a bit, because for the most part, American audiences are more aware of anime and manga when they address the genres of science fiction. I would say primarily at the top of the list, and then secondarily, what would you say? Is it fantasy? I mean, consider Dragon Ball Z and that sort of thing fantasy.
Right now, if you were to ask a younger person, manga really manga actually was doing okay. Manga really got its kind of kick in the pants with shoujo or girl manga, because if you look in the 90s, when I would ever go into the Walden Books or Barnes and Noble, there were tons of young ladies reading manga, and I think
Yes.
it was
Yep.
the idea that manga, I think it was like, well, American boys have superheroes, and now the girls finally found kind of their comics.
Sure.
And so during those sales, after like Sailor Moon and stuff came out, it completely switched. And if you go into manga stores, it switched from giant robots and sci-fi to
Romance, high school.
romance, girl, the magical girl manga, which would be Magic Rayer, Sailor Moon, more romantic and stuff, because they were not getting on American comics, and they found this, and of course the Japanese thinking like, well, if that's what you want, okay, and they just flooded it over here. If you go over the Dragon Ball Z, and I mean Dragon Ball Z, a lot of those got their start by showing on I think it was Cartoon Network, I think that was showing those anime. But a lot of the manga readers, not anime watch, but manga readers, a lot of them were shoujo and girl
Team
comics.
Gashimon.
Yeah,
that shows in America. Gashimon.
Yeah. Well, there's still American, there's still boys manga and stuff, but it's definitely much more, I remember going that way. One of the ones that I like is a one called Escaflowne, which was a manga and an anime, and that was kind of a shoujo, considered a girl's manga, but had giant robots. And I really liked that. So it was, and I think it was it started to attract the boys and girls, which, let's be honest, American comics have always had a hard time attracting girls.
Yeah,
it's always been considered much more of a boys market.
Right.
So the Japanese coming over and doing that kind of filled in that gap that was missing, and they attracted the young adult and girls. And of course, shonen, which is boys manga like Dragon Ball Z, a big jump. Most anime manga is usually read by kids. There's a lot of adults that read it, but most don't. Our age, I think it's because when we were growing up, it was niche. Now you're going to see that when you see the younger generation reach our age, it's going to be much more manga influence, and it might switch. American comics might become the new niche everyone's into.
Yeah, I think
because
it might flip. Because I'll tell you right now, a lot of stylistically, I'm following a lot of the art in current mainstream titles that I flip through when I'm at the store. Like today, a lot of the mainstream titles that with very well known characters are being drawn more and more in not anime style, but in a more anime influenced style. So there's a lot more of the what I call the big head, big hand, big feet look.
Right. I mean, of course, you read Scott McCloud's understanding comics, which he addresses this is what a lot of I get that information from. He was addressing that those characters go more towards iconography and icon. I mean, look at the continual allure of Charlie Brown and Peanuts. I mean, that's the simplest cartoon ever, and it's still immediately recognizable. Still has that allure.
Yeah, well, even in the mid '90s, when I was on Impulse with Craig Rousseau, he had the he did the big feet and the big head and everything. And I spent 2.5 years working on that, and that was very influenced by the manga style. His particular style is very manganized.
Oh yeah. Well, Joe, and I always say Madera. I never can say that guy's last name right. I'm so sorry, Joe Mad, if you hear this. He infused, and his big influence was Ninja Scroll, and he took a lot of anime movies at the time and infused that, and just did his own thing, and then of course kind of developed that sort of American manga infusion style, which has become popular over the years.
I wanted to bring this up. You mentioned Ninja Scroll, and Ninja Scroll, while it's a martial arts story, it also has elements of horror in it. And I wanted to get across too that one of the more popular manga and also anime films that I was experiencing in that time period was Blood, the Last Vampire, which is basically very similar to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but it's got a cool twist in that it takes place during the Vietnam War on an American air base in Japan, which is just odd time period and very odd place to have a vampire story, but that's part of the appeal. That was a successful movie, but then they did an American version of that. Well, not American, a live action version, I should say.
It wasn't
this one
Blood,
starred a
was it?
Korean leading lady. Did you see the live action of Blood?
No, I did not, but I know they did. Now, was that made it in Japan, or was that an American production?
I think it was I think it was
co-made. Okay.
multiple producers, but I think it was made for American audiences primarily.
Yeah, and as far as I know, I think that series, because some series started as manga, go to anime. I think that particular one started as an anime, and then there was a manga made after. Sometimes they go reverse, and I think it was just kind of like that only story. I don't think it was very long. I remember there's always been that sort of trope in anime about like this sort of samurai ninja girl in the schoolgirl uniform. I mean, let's face it, schoolgirl uniform is an icon of sexiness. We won't go into that for the Japanese, but of course,
the samurai girl. Yeah,
exactly. And so, I remember there was a series, an old movie called Project Eiko, and it was a really goofy movie about this girl, schoolgirl, and I think she had a friend, and she was
in her uniform, and
she was super powered, and she would go to school, and this one girl kept trying to defeat her, and like every time she'd defeat the girl, and every time she'd come back to the opening to go to school, the girl would come back with better weapons and more stuff. And at the end of the movie, they kind of hint. There's a scene where she's at the very end. I think her name was Eiko, running out the door, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I have to research this again. I remember this. There was a Superman's uniform laying over the side, like she was Superman's daughter, or something of that nature. And so she was going to school, and this one girl was like, she was this rich girl that's like, no one bets me, and Eiko would just beat her up and then go to school. And it was just the whole movie is literally this like running gag. It was kind of entertaining, but again, that sort of schoolgirl uniform, I don't know. They're really, I mean, in a lot of countries, like even British and stuff, they have school uniforms, but the Japanese have fetishized it, unfortunately.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
I will be right back. I have to plug my laptop in.
Okay.
We'll see in a second. One of the things that made that story appealing was, while it was Buffy the Vampire Slayer in some of its aspects, the tone is brutal. And the violence is brutal, and they don't shy away from the fact that here's this teenage girl, Saya, who is hired by a secret government agency to fight demons, of course, with a samurai sword.
Oh, yeah.
But she's still battling the sort of high school soap opera girl that doesn't like her, bullies, all of the things that a teenage girl faces, and yet she's a demon hunter, a vampire hunter as well. And then you find out a little bit more about her. But it was just this great twist on Buffy. It was like, Buffy was like everything American. And then here the Japanese took it and went, hey, what about this? And it's a lot darker and unbelievably violent. But at the same time, it made it very entertaining. It was fun.
If you want to watch something, and you can still watch this on YouTube, and I'm amazed you can even find it on YouTube. It is called The Legend of the Overfiend. And when I was growing up, this was a very famous anime that borderline on hentai and straight up horror. Ooh. And it is still intense. I mean, I was watching it, and The Legend of the Overfiend. I think it's called The Legend of the Overfiend.
Okay.
But it's gory, it's sexualized, it's everything, and that was like the sort of legendary. I mean, you see like Legend of the Overfiend, you've seen some cool stuff, and I mean now we don't see. Of course, we all know the hentai market is very big in Japan, but this is one where they were bringing it over. And I remember going in high school, if you had friends who saw this and knew how to get a hold of this, you're like, wow. I didn't see it so much later.
It becomes a forbidden thing, right?
Yeah. Well, the Japanese, I kind of brought that up because when Japanese go into horror, they don't mess around. Americans do horror almost like horror light. When the Japanese do it, it's just absolutely a gore fest.
It's terrifying.
Some of it's intense, which makes it much more impactful for me. But even in animated, they did some stuff in that film where I'm like, that's not right.
I can't believe they just did that. Well, in a more subtle way and in a dramatic way, a romantic way, in Neon Genesis and Evangelion, the younger character, he's 14 and he's, through circumstances, he's rooming with an older girl, and she kind of teases him, but there's nothing overt sexually going on, but the way it's drawn and the camera angles and stuff, you kind of go,
Yes.
okay, it's there. This kid is just coming of age and he's kind of got a crush on this girl, and she can tell, and she's kind of using that situation to have fun with
A
it.
little bit, yeah.
And they do a terrific job of, they don't go too far with it and make it awkward. They just make it it's really endearing. It's endearing, and you can tell, like, if you were a 14-year-old boy, you'd be like, wow, I'd have a crush on that girl too. You know, she's
Of course. I mean,
cute.
living. I don't know if you've been introduced or come across Asuka yet. Asuka is another third character. If you haven't come across Asuka,
no, not in episode 2, not yet.
Asuka,
Maybe.
okay.
I don't know.
She's a red-headed German lady. You'll know her when you see
Okay.
her. She's one of the other main characters. She adds an element to that because she ends up living with them. And so she adds kind of
I hadn't met her yet. But there's just, I love the way that they're restraining their sort of the sexualization of that and keeping it very much, you know, a tension element, and it's compelling for the characters, because you're like, is he gonna like get a crush on her? How's that gonna affect?
How's that gonna affect them? Yeah,
you know, all of this kind of thing. But
I can't give away anything that's coming out.
Okay, don't give away anything. I want to ask you about giant robots and kaiju, and I want to ask you if Pacific Rim is directly influenced by all of this, or whether Pacific Rim is actually taken from a manga or an anime.
Was Guillermo. I can never say
Del Toro. Guillermo del Toro.
Mm-hmm. That was just a movie, basically. The whole thing was just a tip of the hat, an homage to the manga and anime.
That's what I thought.
It was just like, you know, he's like, well, why don't we make this, you know, Godzilla, you know, like do a Godzilla, giant robots fighting monsters. And that's exactly what Evangelion is, except it's kind of taking that. And that is actually a genre in Japan. More of like giant robots fighting big monsters.
Really, that was Guillermo's sort of nod and tribute to the industry in Japan. Because he did a terrific job. I thought.
I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah.
He
really did.
I got to see it now.
You got to see Pacific Rim.
You
I
haven't
don't know
seen
about the
Pacific
second
Rim
one,
yet?
but the first.
And I saw the second one. I actually didn't mind.
I don't see that many films, unfortunately.
They made a second one, and it's okay. It's pretty good. I liked it.
It's pretty good. Del Toro is great in his aesthetics. You know, some directors and screenwriters are really good with story, but their aesthetics for artists are kind of like, gosh, that's kind of a dull camera angle, or I hate that two shot. For example, this is a side note, but I won't forget where I am. I'm coming back to it. M. Night Shyamalan's direction is very similar to Kubrick's in that he likes static shots. For example, two people talking with low monotone voices, no changes, no cutaways, and it builds tension. And he uses those cliches and maneuvers that Kubrick did in many of his films, particularly in things like 2001, to build tension and then release the tension with a screen cut or something, a close up and so on.
Right.
But you know, now that you come back, Del Toro, for example, a lot of times you'll watch those types of things that M. Night does, and you'll go, that's distracting me. I can tell what you're doing. I'm looking, I'm seeing behind the curtain. I'm seeing the smoke and mirrors. I'm seeing the threads on the puppet.
Yeah.
But with Del Toro, he does the opposite. He does such beautiful visuals that you're just like, man, this story could be crap. I don't even care. This is one of the most beautiful shots I've ever seen.
He does that, and sometimes Del Toro movies are hit or miss story-wise to me. Sometimes I think they're great. He has a hard time sticking to endings. Sometimes I feel like he gets to the ending, he's just like, okay, they fight, and I don't know, whatever. But not all the time. I mean, sometimes there was a one called Crimson, I think it's called Crimson Peaks or Crimson something.
Crimson Peak. It was a gothic horror story, haunted house story.
And then I think by the end, like, she defeats the guy by hitting him over the head with the shovel. And I'm like, oh. Because it's funny because my friend Summer, we go to see movies, and we had the same sort of opinion of Del Toro. We're like, it was so pretty. She's like, but we just come out of the movie, how was the story? And it's like, okay. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, if he could marry those two, he'd be a force to reckon with.
Del Toro, I'll tell you what. Have you seen Pan's Labyrinth? Pan's Labyrinth is... That's one of those times where that felt like a manga or an anime where it's powerful on multi levels. Visually, the philosophy of it's very dark and powerful, and then the imagery sticks with you. It's unforgettable. It's scary. It's like a nightmare.
And this is kind of a complete off the subject of anime, but we're talking about beautiful cinematography. Morbius, I went and saw that. That was it was stunning. I would highly recommend it for just the cinematography.
The cinematography alone.
There was a couple of tired old tropes in the movie, in the storyline, but the cinematography was gorgeous. Yeah. It's worth it just to soak up the beauty of it.
That sounds like my kind of film.
If you want that in an anime, definitely any of Studio Ghibli, any of something like Mononoke, but Spirited Away is it's transcendent. Like, you literally get drawn into a girl's dream world, almost nightmare in many ways, but it's unforgettable. That's the one thing I tell people, like, what's it about? What's it about? Like, I'm not going to tell you what it's about. You just need to watch it because much like Kubrick's approach in 2001, it's hypnotic on purpose. And so it starts out extremely slow, and you kind of go, what's going to happen here? And then once the thing happens that happens to this girl's parents, then you go, oh, okay, this is going to be weird. And it gets weirder and weirder, but you can't stop watching it, and you're transported into this other world. You know what I'm talking about, right, Aaron?
Oh, yeah. I saw that in theaters. I've seen... That was probably one of my favorite ones. My favorite one of his is an older one called Castle in the Sky, which I really liked.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah,
there's a few others. I haven't watched many of the new Studio Ghibli's, one or two. Usually they're interesting and stuff. Studio Ghibli, I think, does a good job. Princess Mononoke kind of missed me. I need to watch it again, but there were certain things I watched. I'm like, I heard so much about it when I watched. I mean, that could have been my Achilles heel, is hearing so much. Like, this movie's great. Then when you watch, you expect amazing things, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, I tried to stay away from it. Yeah. Spirited Away surprised me because I didn't know that much about the world of Japanese tea rooms and all of the things I learned about the culture, but also just the nightmarish dream world that she enters.
Oh,
and that's beautifully done, and it's unforgettable. If you're gonna see one, that's the Studio Ghibli to see, in my opinion.
The Japanese usually, I think in Shinto, a lot of the spirits, like, they're not evil, but they eat humans as like food. So it's very very.
You're like,
they do straight up horror stuff. Yeah, they do.
Yeah, really there's a lot of witches in Asian culture. Lots of witches.
People who
different types of witches and different
types of witches, tricksters. There's also a lot of natural guardians, I should say.
Water spirits,
spiritual beings, earth spirits, forest spirits,
fire spirits.
I think that's mostly Shinto, but it could be other forms.
Yeah. It descends from the Shinto heritage of everything having spirit. But what I love about it is, this giant 100-foot spirit will just appear walking through the forest, and they'll go, the forest spirit. And you're like, what?
Yeah, they're totally.
It's so weird, but to them, the way it's written, it always seems like it's kind of half expected and typical. That's our forest spirit. It's kind of big and scary.
Like, they've seen this or been around and stuff.
It's like, it happens. You go into the wrong part of the forest, you're going to need a 100-foot forest spirit. It's going to walk out. It's going to scare you. It's a Tuesday in Japan.
That's just Ralph. Ignore him.
Exactly.
Well, the Japanese have always been good at spectacle on a larger scale. They've always been enamored with that. And I think that, and I guess, again, I'm guessing, but I think a lot of the spectacle on a larger scale comes from the bombing of World War II.
Yeah. I guess it all started a lot from our perspective after World War II, with their creativity beginning in earnest, but especially with Godzilla, which is definitely the closest linchpin to, look what happened to us. This is what happens when you unleash something like an
radioactivity
bomb, and then nature gets back to you, and all this kind of stuff. So it was a cautionary tale. But the enduring nature of the Godzilla mythology. I mean, even today, you're getting Godzilla movies now. I don't even know, is that even considered anime in a way? Have they done animated versions of Godzilla?
They've done. I think Godzilla is mostly movies. It was originally a movie, and then they've done animated. There's one called Shin Godzilla, which I have not seen it, and I don't
Yeah.
know.
I heard that was good. I heard about that today at the comic shop.
That is actually
manager
done by the same guy who directed Evangelion. Same director.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why I kind of wanted to see it. He's done some other stuff, but yeah, it's kind of one of the more ones that I like. The American versions of Godzilla, they're okay. I think strangely enough, there has to be almost that sort of cheesiness to Godzilla to make it work. Like it has to look like he's running around model cities, like little models of cities. And so, I don't know. There's something. I think when I almost think sometimes when I watch the American version, like, yeah, it's so realistic and cool, but that realism kind of defeats the purpose of it a little bit.
It does a little bit. I have to say though, my favorite one of the more recent series is Godzilla King of the Monsters, because I just absolutely love that idea, that old fashioned. It turns me into a 15-year-old kid again, where it's just the monsters are all fighting, right? So you've got Ghidorah, and you have Rodan, and you have Mothra, and you got Godzilla, and
that's probably my favorite one. Yeah,
it's like, oh, this is so cool,
because
you got the secret organization that knows about all of them. You know what I mean?
I think they're making another one. I actually did like Godzilla versus King Kong, but the King Kong was never really part of that. I think King
that
Kong
universe.
In the 1960s, they did a series of King Kong films. Oh, and there was some crossover with Godzilla.
A little bit, okay.
Just a horrible King Kong suit. It was very cheesy. But they did a crossover a couple times.
So it's been done before. Okay.
Yes.
It has been done before.
Poorly, but it was
poorly. Yeah, Rob is correct. Not on this scale. What I found interesting when I first heard they were doing Godzilla versus Kong, I was like, wow, that's going to be about a 30-second film, because Godzilla's like the size of a building, and Kong climbs buildings. So all Godzilla has to do is really turn and breathe, and bye-bye, fried Kong.
Well, they gave him an axe, so we had to give him something to defend himself, right? Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, how are they going to do this? Well, what they did was they came up with a conceit, an excuse that as time goes by, Kong kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger. So by the time Godzilla versus Kong continuity arrives, he's almost equal in size to Godzilla, so they could fight. Which I was like, okay, I'll give it to you guys. You got to have a reason to allow Kong in to fight Godzilla. I get it. Oh, wow, look who's joining us. Yes, it's our favorite late arrival, ladies and gentlemen, Brent Larson. Hi, Brent.
Hi, I'm your only late arrival.
Sometimes the word bomber, John Medic III, does come in late, but not tonight, sadly. We are discussing anime and its rich heritage and influence on American comics and storytelling, and we've covered much of the more well-known anime in terms of things like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, Blood the Last Vampire, and then we've talked about some things, Neon Genesis, Evangelion, and we were talking about subject matter wise. It seems like that anime tends to cover, in the more popular animes, the science fiction material, particularly technology and its interaction with humanity, and then fantasy, romance, and then horror. And when they go horror, they go all the way. Aaron and I were saying, what anime are you most familiar with, and what influence do you feel like it has had on the comics and American storytelling that you've seen? It can be print or film.
Okay.
I know it's loaded, but take your time and just go for it. Right?
That's a heavy load in that one question.
There's a lot of different ways I can go to answer the question, but I should probably start by saying I don't watch anime. I can't help any in this conversation. Now, I have seen some, like now, forgive me, fans of anime. I'm not harshing on anime at all. But does Attack on Titan count as anime?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's anime influenced, which we've discussed movies and books that are anime influenced. So yes.
Well, Attack on Titan was a manga anime, and then they made a live action movie, a series of live action movies.
They made it live action. Oh wow.
They made a few. in
And
Japan. They're
then,
Japanese.
Demon Slayer, is that considered anime?
Yeah, it's one of the newer ones. That would be shonen anime.
Okay. I'm curious about anime, so my short answer is I got nothing for you. My longer is more of a query of, okay, so say I wanted to get into anime, where would I start?
Well, I think Aaron can answer that
That's
question
a good question.
better than I could.
If you want to get into anime, anymore today with the ease of it, just go on Netflix and look under the anime tab and pick something that looks cool to you. Simple
There
as
you
that.
go.
Barnes and Nobles has tons of manga, whatever looks cool. You can go to sites. There's certainly more popular ones. A lot, like I said, a lot of the anime and manga is aimed towards teenagers and younger nowadays. That seemed to what hooked. This is why, even though Akira and Ghost in the Shell are famous, you don't see a lot of stuff about them. You see more stuff about, Demon Hunter, Naruto, Dragon Ball Z. Those are geared towards younger people.
Vampire
Which
Hunter
again,
D.
the Japanese are filling in that niche that American comics have not ignored, but inadvertently, kids don't read American comics, and so we make more comics to sell towards the fans of comics, which are us. And so a lot of kids don't read those, and so it's like, well, what kind of comics do kids read? And the Japanese were like, come over here, we've got stuff, and that's where that's why Scholastic and manga are just destroying a lot of American comics in sales, is because we're not. I think what was it? I was listening to this guy online, Purge. I think the number one selling comic that I know of is Dogman by Scholastic, and that's an American comic, and that just sells tons.
Dogman?
Yeah.
I've heard of it.
Oh yeah. Go in the Target and stuff, look up Dogman, you'll find it everywhere. You're not gonna find it in comic shops, but where kids, Barnes and Noble and stuff. Oh yeah, he also did another series called Captain Underpants, which you've probably never heard of. This
Yes.
I've heard of that.
It's his sort of sequel, another property that gentleman has done. And so yeah, Scholastic manga again, and so they're playing on the American tropes of comics are for kids. Okay, that's cool. So they're selling comics geared towards kids. This is something I think American comic creators have been kind of fighting a little bit. American comics could be for anyone, so we're trying to battle that stigma. Comics are for kids by making more adult stuff that we like, and a lot of the other companies are like, well, no, comics are for kids, we'll lean into that, and then they're kind of taking all the money because parents are more likely to buy comic books for kids. We buy it for collectability, so it's a little difference. So it's one of, I think that's one. I think the Japanese also, when it comes to writing stories, they write unique situations. So like, for instance, Akira, that's about a kid who gets psychic powers, and then turns out, Mackenzie, she is my favorite. My goddess has come upon to
and that's sweet.
Bless me.
Thanks, Mackenzie.
And
how much did you pay her?
Yeah. I'm eating top ramen for a while now.
Well, I think it's fair to say too that Aaron has helped guide us through most of this discussion because he is so well versed in this. But one thing we're seeing is that in many of the successful anime, there's the window to the story is very often a teenager going through some coming of age struggle, and so very much so. And in fact, the main character sometimes is the teenager. In Neon Genesis, that would be true. In Ghost in the Shell, however, it's not.
It's
the main character is a self-aware AI that's functionally human. That's a law enforcement officer that's trying to find her place in humanity.
She's actually not an AI. Major Kusanagi is a cyborg. She's human and artificial. She has her own. She has her own brain.
Her partner.
Yeah, she has a brain, and internal organs. So yeah.
Right, she's closest thing to full AI. That
No,
that
she's human. She was human that was actually transformed into. That's what he was trying to go. Like, if you were actually getting to the point of augmentation of
right,
humans, the sort of cyborg,
right.
where is the ghost? What is the humanity? Hence
Basically,
the
she's the
term
bionic
ghost in
woman.
the shell. Yeah,
Yes.
in a way.
Yes. Like, where
So
does the
she does have
ghost
a
go?
human
So,
brain. Yeah, in
right.
there.
So they were what they were trying to address there is what makes a human being human when technology
Exactly.
gets so advanced that you have a hybrid that is, what would you say percentage wise? Is she 75, 85% tech?
I think from what I remember in the comics, she has like most of it, like Brios and Appleseed had like same thing. Most of his internal organs he could eat. He had a
Yeah.
brain. It was encased in a cyborg shell. Same with Major Kusanagi. The AI came from the idea, his big idea with the puppeteer or the AI was with the vastness of information on the internet that could you, if you had, in other words, could life be born from information itself?
Yes. Could information become self-aware?
Self-aware. And what happened is he's like, I can, but he's like, I can only copy myself verbatim. I would need the that's what they're talking about at the end with the genetics. I would need the genetic codes to, like, I mean, we intermix the genetic codes to make various humans. We don't copy each other. He was only able to copy himself, and that's why he wanted to merge with Kusanagi to make a third, sort of like, now we're mixing your AI or whatever, or genetics and mine, and we're making a new life form. That's why at the end she was like, she's in that little girl's body, but she's like, you Major Kusanagi? She's like, well, I am, and then I am more. I am also this. The sort of idea that you have to have a mix of genetics or code to produce life. That was what, and in the comics he talked about that a lot too.
Yeah,
So yeah.
they address some very serious subjects with all the fireworks show that you're watching, and they give you
Yeah.
plenty of fireworks to watch, Brent. So I mean, that one is one I would highly recommend as a sort of
Ghost in the Shell,
doorway into anime for people our age, or near our
Ghost in-
age.
if you
Mackenzie says blessings all around. Thanks,
yes.
Mackenzie.
If I hated the movie,
The movie was an amalgamation of the original movie, and there's a few anime series. I don't like the anime series. I just like the movie and the original comic. The anime series, some of it's a hit or miss. I don't know. It was okay. It never really. I'm much more of an Appleseed fan. There's Appleseed movies. You can. I know you can find Akira on Hulu. I'm not sure if you can find Ghost in the Shell for streaming. You might be able to.
You really need to see
Uh,
Akira.
Yeah,
That's
You need to
that's
see
kind of
it.
like the granddaddy of them all.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
I would also say that there are American science fiction films so influenced by anime that that's not talked about very much. I'll use a current one. I don't know, Brent, if you saw Blade Runner 2049.
oh
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
The subplot of that is very much taken from Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
Basically, that they're protecting a self-aware AI that was created as a life form because it became
Right.
self-aware. So that they sort of took the Ghost in the Shell idea in a way. Not that didn't exist before. I mean, Philip
Oh
K.
yeah.
Dick's
I mean, this
novel
stuff was.
existed
Oh
way
yeah.
before.
Well,
you
they've
know.
talked about this in science fiction for forever. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
iRobot was talking about that,
Yes,
and stuff
yes,
like that.
yes.
So they just took it on a more advanced level. The thing that I think does separate manga from American, what I was saying before, is I think there's okay, so like Akira is Tatsuro runs into a kid who gets these psychic powers, and then he kind of goes on his own quest. They write situations of the characters unique to the story. Ghost in the Shell is she is a cop, but she's dealing with her own questions or whatever. We kind of write a lot of our characters are like, well, he's a guy who fights crime, or he's a guy who fights other things. But the Japanese have much more of a little sophisticated situation they run into a little bit. It's not just this guy is a protector or fights things. There's more, like there's one anime I just heard recently with this. If I get this wrong, he basically the he swallows like a finger and gets a curse, and so these other people like like this ancient finger or whatever had this curse. So a lot of people like, well, we need to kill this guy to get rid of the curse. And he's like, yeah, but there's more. I haven't seen the anime, but there's more to it. So that's a very unique situation to the character. Americans don't do that a lot. Our the main goal or pursuit of most of our characters are very, very generalized. And in anime, it's very specific to the story itself. And I do think that's a big difference between the two that I've seen a lot.
James says you have to also remember that in the 2.0 movie, the characters talk about having replaced comics that allow them to break down everything faster, including alcohol.
Yeah.
So he says, I think that something around 90% of themselves have been replaced.
Yeah,
Thanks
he was talking about they had an enzyme that breaks the alcohol down so they can basically drink alcohol without getting drunk.
Right.
So yeah, that was the first movie.
I always think that's interesting too, that like you said, that the in-depth explorations of their angst and their psychological wrestling match with their situation. That's the core of the Major in Ghost in the Shell. She's struggling with, how much of her is and isn't, and how does she interact with people because of that.
Well, yeah, there's a line in the movie where he was saying something like, I remember, she was talking to Batao, her partner, and said something, well, if I died, how much of me is owned by the corporation? How much is me? Like, if I was to die, how much is the corporation going to just take my body back? And how much is me? And it was just kind of going the idea of like, if your body is built by somebody who owns you, will you begin and the corporation and the product, hence the idea of ghosts. So they're not talking about.
Do you become their intellectual property?
Yeah.
Yeah,
kind of in a way. They own you because and he even said like, you're just angry because you can live much longer just with required maintenance. You can live much longer, whatever. But it is one of those things like the more you take away, because in the show they talk about the new rookie, and I can't remember his name. He uses a revolver, which they talk about automatics versus revolvers because Shira always likes guns, and they were talking about automatics jam more and revolvers do not. But he's fully human, and they were like, he's like, why did you have me on your team? I mean, you're all cyborgs. You're much better and faster than me. Why would you have me? And she said, well, she basically said stagnation is death. In other words, we have to have variations like humans and other things in there that combat various situations. If you get too routine in the way you approach things, then people can overtake you. Togosa. Yeah, thank you. He was the rookie's name. And I like Togosa. He's kind of a comedic relief. He was the one, I don't know if you remember, Dean, he was the one where it's like, Togosa, like, they says, like, get off your ass and go check. He's like, yeah. Like, he's always, he's kind of like the guy that's always kind of like, they're running around him and he's like, yeah, I'm trying to do this or whatever.
He's the comic relief. Human. You're right.
Yeah, he's fully human. A bunch of cyborgs. He's outmatched by both of those.
Yeah, completely. Right.
Yeah.
Did you mention earlier that the reason they have the spider mech tank in it is because the director collected spiders with?
Yeah, she would like spiders. In the original manga and in the cartoon, there are spider mechs that they ride. They're like little tanks they get in the back of, and they're called I think they're called Fuchikomas, if I'm not mistaken, and that could be Japanese. I'm not sure what
it could be. I'll have to look it up, but I'll tell you what, that's one of the most memorable scenes in the animated film.
Right, they did put the spider tank in there. Yeah,
her showdown with that one spider tank, and she's trying to survive. And I just watched that, and my jaw dropped at how violent that was. How she has to, overcome the tank and so on, but also just how brutal they were to her in that film. Man,
I mean, she was basically had to Tachikoma, the one of them the one I want in real life. They did put the spider tank in the movie, and in the cartoon, especially in the comic, they do ride these personalized spider tanks called Fuchikomas that are artificially aware. They can talk and stuff, and they're kind of almost a comedic relief. Yeah, the way she had to wait for the Gatling gun. Both of those Gatling guns on that tank were at least 50 caliber. which I
Mhm.
mean, that would have literally melted her within seconds.
I know.
She
I
was
know.
just trying to make the ammo run out. So in any form or whatever, I mean, her gun wasn't going to do anything. I mean, that's why
Right.
she popped the coil out, because she was firing it so fast. I'm sure it just messed up the internal. She wrecked her gun, just like in the movie, and we was talking about, they had high velocity ammo, which I would assume HV ammo would be rifle shells in a gun, which that's the only thing I can think of. You have more gunpowder behind the actual round. But yeah, if you're
Behind the
ejecting them,
projectile.
if it's high velocity at full automatic, yeah, it would melt and warp your barrel. You'd ruin the gun. I mean, you get what you want, but
Yep.
Mhm.
it would ruin the gun at that speed. So I did like the fact that the guy who wrote Ghost in the Shell and Appleseed, created his own fictional gun company. He loves guns, so he'll talk in the
That's
game. I
interesting
can't
too.
remember what the name of the company is, but he'll go into great detail about guns. And me and my friend Tom got into that. We actually enjoy the mechanics of guns or whatever when you actually use them relatively accurately. They're very interesting.
I bet you have potato cannons at your house, don't you?
No,
bet
I
you
actually don't own guns. I actually don't like to own real guns. I think they're useless, but the technology behind them I think is fascinating.
I've seen
it is fascinating.
I've
I
seen a
want to
20
ask this
caliber.
before we run out of time. I want to ask you, Aaron, what do you think, in essence, what can creators learn from watching these successful anime films and reading these successful manga stories to apply to their own creations to make them more popular? What can we learn from anime?
I think the one thing that they can learn is the Japanese anime manga do not use the hero tale that American comics have kind of been used as their benchmark, I think, forever. The classic Greek hero tale. And again, because you're getting tales from a different culture, I think you can do that with even European comics that way. I do think American comics, I mean, and Japanese have tropes too. God, don't get me. Yeah, they have their own tropes and stuff. But I do think superhero comics over kind of being the biggest one, overtaking the American comics. Subaru, yes, that was the name of his fictional gun company. Yes. It's funny. He loves guns and all that. I think the Shiro actually has a background in engineering. I think he's an engineer, but I'm not sure. But yeah, I think the hero tale, that sort of good versus evil, that sort of black and white of American storytelling or Western storytelling, I think is something that is not present in manga. And they don't do a lot of black and white. Like Akira, there's no he's good, he's bad. They're just people with problems and complex situations, and how do they resolve that? I'm not saying that's bad for America, but I'm saying you are getting there's more variety of like takes on stories, and I think this is why people they're tied to the deconstructionism of superheroes, and I'm like, well, you can only go so much with good versus evil, and then where do you go? I mean, that story can only be told so many times.
Well, you can go. I think where people are going now is not so much because we've had deconstruction since Dark Knight Returns.
But that was one of the original classic, and then Watchmen too. Watchmen and
Watchmen too. So now I think it's evolved beyond deconstruction. What they're doing now is they're just making the heroes more conflicted and making them more human. So we have learned that much. What about in terms of technology and style?
I think definitely there's more of a cartoon style in manga that I think and I see kind of bleeding into American. I mean, traditional superhero art, I think, is always going to have its take. I mean, I don't necessarily think they've tried manga Superman and it doesn't really work.
Can I interject something here?
Absolutely.
For one thing, we need to back up the cart because Japanese culture they have normalized manga and anime for the average citizen. It's everywhere over there. Whereas here it's so niche. And people say, oh, comic book, that's just for geeky losers. We need to normalize the entire comics reading situation. Whereas you can get them anywhere and you can pick them up, read them, and it's an everyday thing. You don't get teased for it. It's just part of American culture. If we
Do
can
you
back
think the
up the cart
Marvel
and do that.
movies, Barb? Do you think Marvel movies
Oh,
have
yeah,
helped?
absolutely. They've helped, but we need
Yeah.
to push beyond the movies and say,
Okay.
now you've seen the movie, now you need to pick up the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Yep.
think
Good
Disney
point.
sometimes could be. Disney has always been wanted to me, like whether you like Disney or not. I think has always been kind of a detriment to American comics a little bit, just American population, because it reinforces, animation and comics for family, friends, and kids. So even the Marvel movies are that way. And Japanese, obviously, do not care. They'll do. I mean, when you watch further into Evangelion, I mean that Evangelion is huge in Japan. It is huge. They
Mhm.
have like theme parks of it. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Disney. I mean, you can't imagine that being made by Disney. It just would not happen.
Right.
And so I think the Japanese just look at comics as another form of storytelling, like books or movies, and Americans really just have that. No, it's for kids. We have that. You're supposed to read kids' books, then comic books, then books. And I think I taught another show about like the sort of humanist movement. Is we have this big thing in America where like, in order to show you're intelligent or mature and intellectual, you have to read or engage in certain forms of media.
Right, and comics have a stigma. What you're saying
Exactly.
is basically comics are stigmatized.
I mean, look at Martin
Right.
Scorsese and these directors. They hate the Marvel movies. Why? Because
Yeah.
those are
Yeah.
shows for kids.
It's sad
right? Yeah.
because it is an indigenous American art form, like
It is.
jazz, and we
Yeah.
should wear that as a badge of honor. We should
Exactly.
celebrate it, and we should celebrate it as an art form and say, hey, you shouldn't lock yourself into a cage of comics can only be like this and do this and do these
Right.
characters and so on. I think that'll change with time and
I
skill.
do. And I think people who are in the manga, I think it's going to be a generational thing. I think it's going to change
Yeah.
with the generations.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think you're
so
right.
too.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rob? Did you like as you draw and you look at the art of these people, and I for one am inspired by their attention to detail. If nothing else, I would say manga taught me to respect the attention to detail in things that are seemingly innocuous and unimportant in a scene. And so I've learned to be like, okay, you can't do every single detail in this background, but at least choose the significant portions and
Yeah.
make it believable. Is that fair to say, Rob?
Yeah, I subscribe to the school of minimalism. Put only in there what you absolutely need to tell the story.
Okay.
Maybe add a little extra detail to give it some depth. But I think personally, what little I've seen of Megan, I haven't read much, so I can't say if it really helps the story along or not. It almost seems like there's too much. I think
And
that's
something,
I think that's part of the inspiration for the comics in the 90s that had all that scratchy stuff that if it's done well, it helps give you the three-dimensionality of the form. But there were too many artists who saw just that and were putting it on, and it really didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Well, as we've discussed in the past, if you go corner to corner, top to bottom, left to right with detail, it's wallpaper. It's not going to work. But what I'm talking about is that wonderful attention to detail on the things that matter.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate their effort on that. And that it's taught me to be more attentive to those things. Like if a character's carrying a specific weapon, I want to draw that weapon consistently from panel to panel to panel.
Yeah. I use reference when I draw a gun.
Yeah, me too. I use reference when I draw guns, cars.
I'm not a big gun fan, but I have
Yeah,
a stack of magazines right here that
look at
drawing guns and stuff.
There you go.
Yeah. And I think
That's what I'm doing.
Well, there was American artists. I didn't realize this, and some guy online pointed out, like some of the Spider-Man McFarlane images that were famous. He stole buildings from the Akira comic and put them in the background.
Oh, did he really?
He just outright lifted them and put them in there.
Swiping, yeah.
Swiping, yeah.
And a lot of times, Yeah,
we
well,
all
a
do
lot
that.
of the creating of manga is a little different than Americans. We have like artist, writer, illustrator. They actually do almost what like Dave Sim did with Cerberus. Like they'll have a guy who draws buildings, and a guy who draws trees, and a guy who draws cars, and the main
Yeah, they
author.
break it
And so
down.
yeah, so like he'll draw the characters, and he'll pass to the guy who draw the buildings, and so it's like this piggyback that makes it. 'Cause-
Assembly line.
yeah, and they make
Yeah,
like
some
of them can make up to 15 pages a week.
I know, right? Well, guys, that brings us to our close tonight, but I really want to thank Aaron for your expertise, and I want to thank everybody for showing up. And as we like to close out, I want to say the line, but before I say it, there's something we have to touch base on, and that is there's a Kickstarter coming up really soon on I believe it is.
Yeah.
So I
May
want
5th.
everyone to keep their eyes on this Kickstarter because it's going to be obsolete, it's going to be cray, and it's going to be Beyond the Stars, and
3 comics instead of 2. So yeah,
and it's going to be a big deal. We're going to have more on it next week, and we're going to be talking because it's going to be is it May 4th next Wednesday? I believe it is.
May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th.
Yes, it is.
It's going to be our special. I know people are going to groan and moan about this, but we're going to make it our Star Wars discussion night, and it's going to be fun. So, all the Star Wars fans, get your Star Wars on for next Wednesday night, and also keep an eye out for this upcoming Kickstarter. We'll get more information as we get closer. I'm sure the Sunday night folks will be talking about it. But as we always like to close, guys, we like to say,
make mine Silverline.
Make mine. Silverline. And
hi, I'm Greg Horn. Make mine Silverline.